Councillors, please stand. Almighty God, we, the representatives of the citizens of the City of Brisbane, are assembled here to strive and care for the welfare of our city and all its people. Lord, we ask that you guide us in the decisions we make today. Amen. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, our respected elders past and present. Please be seated. I declare the meeting open, and I remind all councillors of your obligations to declare material, personal and conflicts of interest where relevant, and requirement of such to remove yourself from the meeting for debate and voting where applicable. Councillors, are there any apologies? Councillor Landers.
Mr Chair, I advise that Councillor Maddock will be absent, and I move that he be granted a leave of absence from the meeting.
Second that.
Seconded. Moved by Councillor Landers, seconded by Councillor Hutton, that Councillor Maddock be granted leave of absence from today's meeting. All those in favour say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Please lower your hands. All those against say no and raise your hand. The ayes have it. Councillors, I draw to your attention the notice of motion at item 2 on the agenda. Lord Mayor, would you please move the motion?
Thank you, Mr Chair. I move that Council resolves to adopt the investment policy at attachment A, to adopt the debt policy at attachment B, to revoke the partial remission of rates and charges for pensioners policy adopted on the 20th of June last year by Council Resolution number 8894/2018-19, to adopt the partial rebate of rates and charges pensioners policy at attachment C for the 2021 financial year, to revoke the partial remission of rates and charges for first homeowners policy adopted on the 20th of June last year by Council Resolution 894/2018-19, to adopt the partial rebate of rates and charges first homeowners policy at attachment D for the 2021 financial year, to revoke the partial remission of general rates not-for-profit organisations adopted on the 25th of June 2015 by Council Resolution 704/2014-15, to adopt the partial rebate of general rates not-for-profit organisations policy at attachment E for 2021 financial year, to revoke the pensioner debt management policy adopted on 8th of September 1998 by Council Resolution 311/1998-99, to adopt the payment for overdue rates or charges policy at attachment F for the 2021 financial year, to adopt the partial rebate of rates and charges COVID response policy at attachment G for the 2021 financial year, to adopt the partial rebate of rates and charges job seeker policy at attachment H for 2021 financial year, to delegate to the Chief Executive Officer all of its powers under Section 11 of the City of Brisbane Act 2010 specified in column 1 of table 1 on the general conditions of delegations as set out in table 1, and to adopt the Brisbane Infrastructure Charges Resolution number 9/2020 at attachment I with effect on and from the 1st of July 2020. And finally, to approve the report of the Establishment and Coordination Committee dated 15th of June 2020 at attachment J.
Seconded.
It's been moved by the Lord Mayor, seconded by Councillor Allen, that the Council resolves to adopt the investment policy at attachment A, to adopt the debt policy at attachment B, to revoke the partial remission of rates and charges to pensioners policy adopted on the 20th of June 2019 by Council Resolution 894/2018-19, to adopt the partial rebate of rates and charges pensioners policy at attachment C for the 2020-21 financial year, to revoke the partial remission of rates and charges for first home owners policy adopted on the 20th of June 2019 by Council Resolution 894/2018-19, to adopt the partial rebate and rates and charges first home owners policy at attachment D for the 2020-21 financial year, to revoke the partial remission of general rates not-for-profit organisations adopted on the 25th of June 2015 by Council Resolution 704/2014-15, to adopt the partial rebate of general rates not-for-profit organisations policy at attachment E for the 2020-21 21 financial year, to revoke the pensioner debt management policy adopted on 8 September 1998 by Council Resolution 311/1998-99, to adopt the payment for overdue rates or charges policy at attachment F for the 2020-21 financial year, to adopt the partial rebate of rates and charges response to COVID-19 policy at attachment G for the 2020-21 financial year, to adopt the partial rebate of rates and charges job seeker policy at attachment H for the 2020-21 financial year, to delegate to the Chief Executive Officer all of its powers under Section 11 of the City of Brisbane Act 2010 specified in column 1 of Table 1 on the general conditions of delegations as set out in Table 1, to adopt the Brisbane Infrastructure Charges Resolution number 9/2020 at attachment I with effect on and from 1 July 2020, to approve the report of the Establishment Coordination Committee dated the 15th of June 2020 at attachment J. Is there any debate? The Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Obviously, these various motions that have been put forward are a normal part of enabling what's happening in the budget and supporting the budget process. The investment policy and debt policy obviously facilitates us building our infrastructure program going forward. I mentioned before that over the 10-year period, which is listed out in our debt policy, the current financial year's published budget indicated that over 10 years we would be borrowing $1.755 billion. In this updated version, that has been reduced to $1.715 billion. So over the 10 years, the borrowings haven't changed. That doesn't mean that they may not change in future years, but it does provide us with capacity going forward if we did want to invest in further capital works or major infrastructure. We haven't, in this particular budget, seen an increase in the 10-year borrowing expectations. And as I referred to before, that gives us the capacity going forward to do more down the track. The partial rebate of rates and charges for policy for pensioners policy, that this is an ongoing policy that's been in place and is renewed every year to provide pensioners, full pensioners, with a 40% rates rebate and part pensioners with a 20% rates rebate. When it comes to the amount that's provided, the 40% rates rebate would be provided up to an amount of $1,040 for full pensioners. The 20% rebate would be available up to $486. It's estimated that there's more than 43,760 pensioners that will benefit from this rates rebate. When it comes to the partial remission of rates for first homeowners, obviously there's a change that we've flagged this year. There's an existing first homeowners rates rebate, which sees a 50% discount on rates for the first year for first home buyers. Now that applies to both existing properties and new build homes. Going forward, we're adding in a 100% rates discount for the first 12 months for new build homes. So if you buy an existing home, you get a 50% rates discount for the first 12 months. If you buy a new build home, you get a 100% discount for the first 12 months. This is obviously designed to stimulate and support the construction of new homes and responds to the issues that I referred to before, which was the major decline in expectation in the industry of the construction of new homes, where the HIA was predicting something like a 40% reduction in the construction of new homes as a result of the current economic climate. You've seen other levels of government stepping up their efforts to support first home buyers. There's some very generous schemes in place at other levels of government, and this is our small but important way of supporting those programs and adding to those programs. Ultimately, the reason we do this is not just to support the first home buyers themselves, and we know that getting into the first home is something that is costly and requires a lot of scrimping and saving and a lot of bills in that first year, but it's also about supporting the workers, the builders, the tradies in that industry that help build these new homes. We've got the partial rebate of general rates for not-for-profit organisations. This updated policy seeks to assist eligible not-for-profit organisations whose principal objectives are to provide services that fundamentally support and enhance the quality of life of Brisbane residents. The provision of this partial rebate will free up their resources to invest in other important community activities. We've got the payment for overdue rates or charges policy, and this policy ensures the effective management of overdue rates and charges of eligible pensioners and applicants experiencing hardship. Prior to council exercising its power under the regulation to recover overdue rates or charges, council considers it appropriate to offer a concession to ratepayers to defer the payment of rates or charges by agreement with council, where a ratepayer is an eligible pensioner under the policy and the applicant is experiencing hardship. So it's about providing additional support to pensioners who are having trouble paying their rates. There's also the partial rebate of rate and charges in response to COVID-19 policy. Now, this is the policy that enacts the 6-month rate freeze. And so effectively, this policy adds in a rebate on the rates for the first 2 quarters, making up the 6 months, to make sure that there's no increase in rates. Now, this policy applies across both business and residential properties. Now, you'll be interested to know, it's been referred to that the Gold Coast City Council was supposedly doing more. But I was aware of the Gold Coast approach, and that is they announced that rates would go up by 3.5% for all ratepayers, and then there would be a rebate for residential ratepayers to bring that amount down. But what we're left with is businesses and non-residential properties getting hit with a 3.5% rate increase. That's happening on the Gold Coast. So that was what they announced. So I think Councillor Cassidy before was suggesting that the Gold Coast was able to freeze rates. Well, the Gold Coast has hit the residential, so the business ratepayers with a 3.5% rate increase. And obviously that's not something that we are doing. We've treated both business properties and residential properties the same. Everyone gets that 6-month rate freeze because we know that a lot of businesses are doing it really tough, and we know that businesses support jobs, and so everyone right across the community deserves and needs that support at the moment, not just residential property owners. And there's a strong argument to suggest that it's the business people at the moment that deserve the support even more so than some residential property owners, and that's obviously a matter for debate and opinion. But we've taken a consistent approach where both forms of ratepayers get that rate freeze, which is what this COVID-19 rebate policy does. There's also the partial remission of rates and charges job seeker policy. And I just wanted to refer as well to what Councillor Cassidy said earlier. He suggested that this policy should apply to JobKeeper recipients. Now, the issue here is that we heard him speak week after week in council and suggesting that we needed to take a leaf out of the book of Moreton Bay Region Council. Councillor Cassidy asked questions in question time saying, Moreton Bay has provided a $200 rebate to people doing it tough. Why won't you commit to doing the same thing? So we announced in the budget that we would provide an even larger rebate, a $250 rebate to people doing it tough. The criteria that we're applying is the same as the Moreton Region Council rebate. It's for people on job seeker. So Moreton's program is for people on job seeker, not people on JobKeeper. So Councillor Cassidy asked for one thing in the lead up to the budget, and then after the budget, when we delivered what he had suggested was a good program, plus an extra $50 on top of what Moreton had offered, he then criticised it because apparently it was supposed to apply to JobKeeper recipients as well. The Moreton Region Council program does not apply to JobKeeper recipients. It applies to JobKeeper recipients, but that is the program that Councillor Cassidy used as an example and as a benchmark. So I just wanted to point out, this is for people who previously may have had a job. You know, they're homeowners that may have had a job and may have lost that job and are now on job seeker. And we know that at the moment, you know, one could say, well, how many job seekers own their own house? Well, at the moment, quite a lot, unfortunately, quite a lot, sadly, because we've seen people who have, you know, have had decent jobs in their family. They've purchased their home, they've got mortgages.
Lord Mayor, your time has expired. Further speakers, Councillor Cassidy.
Thanks, Chair. Just ask that item 2, adoption of the debt policy, be taken seriatim for voting purposes at the outset, please.
Excuse me, item 2.
Yep.
The debt policy.
Yep.
Yes. Yep. That will be taken. Seriatim for voting. Yes.
Thanks,
yep.
Chair. Yeah. Look, just very briefly, Chair. I think the items that are before us that have been litigated quite extensively over the last couple of weeks and over the last week or so with the budget. We'll be supporting almost all of these items here before us today. We, of course, support the rates remission for the purposes and in response to COVID, but, you know, we are strongly on record as in saying that this approach hasn't gone far enough. This budget and these decisions before us today are all about the priorities that this Lord Mayor has. They were certainly a test of his leadership, and he showed us what his true priorities were in this budget, and that was fundamentally more about himself than the people of Brisbane. When it comes to the debt policy, Chair, I know that Councillor Shree has a certain view on this, that he argues about debt-funded infrastructure, but what we have seen is an enormous amount of debt that this council has incurred over the last 12 years, since it was completely debt-free. Since that debt was wiped completely clean by a previous Labor state government when the water utility companies were established. So Brisbane had a completely clean slate to make decisions about what kind of infrastructure they wanted to build with debt. And what we have seen is the wrong priorities, we believe. So we're at a point now where Brisbane, over the last 12 years, has had about $1 million a day incurring in debt. We know that then the Lord Mayor brushes this aside as an issue of accounting rather than reality, but what the papers show us, that there's $4.3 billion worth of debt, and when you're transferring assets over and that's supposed to account for this increase in debt, it certainly doesn't make sense. So we're paying it off at more than $300,000 a day. So yes, debt for borrowing for investing in infrastructure that is city building is certainly a good thing. And we have argued very strongly that borrowing to fund things like Kingston Smith Drive were not very good decisions. And over the last 4 years, those decisions have been made, which mean necessarily that other decisions have to be made, like half rates freezes and half rates rebates for people, and things like men's shed grants go by the wayside, curbside collections go by the wayside, Brisbane Breeder programs and economic development has to go by the wayside. So that is the argument before us today. We do not support the debt policy of this administration and what it has done over the last 12 years, and we won't be supporting that item going forward.
Further speakers, Councillor Johnston.
Yes, just briefly on that matter, and I do note Miss Molly has made an appearance at the budget meeting of council, and that's lovely. I would like to speak on the matters outlined in the notice of motion. I would also ask that item 13, the delegation to this Chief Executive Officer, is taken seriatim, and I'm happy for it to, well, actually the Labor might not want that. I'd like it to be taken seriatim for voting purposes.
Seriatim 13, item 13, seriatim for voting.
Yes, please. Just briefly on these changes before us today, some of them are fairly standard, some of them aren't, and some of them don't look like they've been changed for a very, very long time. Just briefly, I do want to say that the decision by the Lord Mayor to simply offer a deferral to residents experiencing hardship with their rates, I don't think is adequate, and I'm extremely disappointed that that's the path he's chosen to go down. It's pretty clear in the budget book that council's expecting to get the same amount of rates revenue or a little bit more, in fact, over the 2021 financial year. It strikes me that, not that I'm a big fan of the Prime Minister's, but the Prime Minister has said something that I think is quite spot on. The worst is yet ahead of us in terms of the financial impacts of coronavirus. And whilst we've been having this meeting today, the huge range of major Australian companies have sacked or announced they're going to sack thousands and thousands of people. I think that we need to do more in this space. And whilst I won't vote against what's being put forward here today, I want to say very clearly it's the only thing on offer. There is no alternative. I don't believe the Lord Mayor has got this right. I don't believe the balance in the whole budget is right. And certainly we should be doing more in this space to provide relief to residents. If we provide rates relief, that flows through to people who rent, that flows through to a lot of other people. So I think that we've got this wrong, and I'm very disappointed that essentially this is a sort of I'll have my cake and eat it too kind of approach by the Lord Mayor, because in the scheme of this financial year, he's going to get the money back from the deferral. So I don't believe that goes far enough. But as I said, as there's nothing else on offer, I'm not going to vote against what is probably stingy, probably would be the way I'd describe it. I don't support this council's approach to debt. And over the years, I've spoken about this quite a few times. And the decision a few years ago to put that $500 million on the spare bank card, lock it away in the bottom drawer and never to be touched again, that was a terrible decision by council. This council has no plan to repay debt. This is the problem. It might not be borrowing huge amounts, and the Lord Mayor's making a big song and dance about his borrowing slightly less. Well, we don't know that's going to be the case. Who knows what's going to happen with the Metro next week? I mean, every week it seems to change scope. So when it comes to debt, this LNP administration says one thing, but they do kind of act a bit more like, the Labor Party, in that they like to run it off and never pay it back. And that's essentially what they've done. Back in 2009, we were debt-free. And now there's $4.3 billion in debt sitting against every single ratepayer of Brisbane with no plan to pay it back. A debt policy that sees debt running out for years and years from now. So I certainly don't support that. Finally, just because I am strongly opposed to the delegations that have been undertaken, and again, there's a lot of new councillors, but I oppose almost every delegation that's brought forward. It is the business of us as the elected representatives and of this council to make decisions. This administration, unfortunately, has delegated a huge amount of the decision-making process to the CEO, who then uses his statutory delegations to delegate it to others. And this is how decisions in this council become unaccountable. And I do not support this process. It is one that this LNP administration has increasingly used year after year. We were elected to make decisions for the City of Brisbane. I'm happy to do so. I'm happy to meet and do it as much as we need to. but I do not support delegating more and more power to the CEO of council, and then for him to delegate at his discretion to whoever he chooses to make decisions on behalf of the city. I've said this before, and I certainly will be saying it a lot more. This city is now a corporation. It is not a community, and it is not being run to the benefit of our community. It is being run on the basis of a big corporation. And whilst that might seem like a good idea from a financial management point of view, it is destroying the culture of our city. And to me, these delegations are increasingly concentrating power in the hands of unelected representatives, and that is not how our democratic system works. Councillor Shree might be on one end of that system, where there shouldn't maybe be a system and everybody can sort of do what they want, versus, the Lord Mayor is on the far end of that other system, which is, I'll delegate away my power to an unelected person and they can make the decision, so I can just coast along, like a duck, just glide along on the pond, and, below others are doing all the hard work. That's not what democracy is about, in my view. That's not what I'm about. And I don't support the delegations that have been made by this LNP over many years, and I don't support this one as well. At a time where we're in a global pandemic with major financial challenges, I would think that the Finance Committee could easily handle this, and at least elected representatives would be able to cast an eye over how our community is dealing with the financial impacts of COVID-19 and any adverse consequences. So I do not support the concentration of power into the hands of unelected people. We don't even know, for example, the CEO's salary. I mean, it's just not acceptable to delegate away authority like this. In my view, the delegation, if there had to be one, should more properly be made to the Finance Committee. And at least then councillors have some oversight of how these matters are handled.
Further speakers? Councillor Shree.
Thanks, Jen. Before I begin, can you just clarify for me again which items have already been taken to seriatim?
Item 2 and 13 are seriatim for voting.
So 13 being the delegation.
That's correct. So adopt the debt policy and delegate to the Chief Executive Officer. They're the two that are separate.
Thanks. Can I also ask that items 11 and 12 be taken separately? Together is fine.
Together and separately, yep.
Yep, and also that item 4 is taken separately.
All right. Now, for the interests of the council, it will be for voting purposes items 2, 4, 11 and 12 together, and 13. Councillor Shree.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try and keep my comments brief, but simply to identify that I think the council is still taking a very narrow-minded and short-sighted approach to the way it levies rates and charges in this city. I've looked in some detail at the rates that are charged, for example, on some of the largest supermarkets and larger big box warehouse stores, and I think we're charging them far too little. So, for example, a large supermarket is only viable as a commercial enterprise because it draws in customers from a very large and dispersed geographic area. For a major shopping mall to be commercially profitable, it needs people to be driving in from 6 and 7 suburbs away. Now, for that to be practical, our council administration has to spend millions and millions of dollars on road infrastructure, on wider roads, on intersection upgrades, etc., to carry all those vehicles and to carry all those customers to that shopping mall. In contrast, if you think about local small businesses that are in a local suburban shopping strip, their customers come from a closer geographic area. More of their customers will be walking or riding or stopping in at the shops on the way to other destinations. So those smaller businesses proportionally
have a far lower impact on our transport and road infrastructure maintenance and upgrade costs, because they don't depend on a dispersed customer base traveling long distances. Whereas those really large shopping malls, those major warehouse retail stores, they depend upon a huge volume of traffic being generated, which our council pays for. So essentially, the way our transport network is structured to support those big businesses, we are subsidising the existence of those larger mega malls and car-centric retail businesses at the expense of local small businesses. And we're paying a huge amount of money to do it. So if we were to be charging rates at a level that actually covers the costs that are incurred in order to support a certain land use, we would be charging far more to those larger shopping malls and those larger retail stores. And I know I'm not going to convince the administration of this right now in this budget session, but I would ask the Mayor to, through you, Chair, respectfully ask the Mayor and the Finance Chair to consider this argument a little bit more deeply. I'm not asking for a response right now or anything, but just to go back and look at the numbers in detail, to look at those rates categories and think about whether those, in particular, those really big shopping malls are paying their fair share of council rates. Because I think when you look closely at the impact that those kinds of land uses have on the city's finances as a whole, you'll see that actually they're a net loss. The individual businesses are obviously creating jobs and generating economic activity. But ultimately, the land use is a less productive and a less efficient land use than local small businesses and smaller commercial precincts. So I think there's a case to be made that the quantum of charges we levy on some of those land uses needs to be reconsidered significantly. I'm not saying there are probably some other categories where rates are a little bit too high and some where rates are a little bit too low, but we should be taking a transport-focused approach in evaluating and assigning rates categories and ask ourselves, what is the true cost of these kinds of land uses, and how much money is it costing council to carry all that commuter traffic, to carry all those customers long distances? Because there are many cities in the world that don't have that big car-centric shopping mall culture. People shop more locally. As a result, fewer people drive, and as a result, the councils and governments have to spend less money on road infrastructure. So although we might think, oh, well, these roads are paid for by all the residents and all the ratepayers, the benefit of that road infrastructure flows disproportionately to those certain land uses. And so this is something I hope the administration will think about in future years. Another similar example is inner city car parking lots. Inner city car parking lots make a lot of money, charging fairly high rates for car parking, and attract a lot of additional car traffic into the inner city as a result. Anyone who understands basic supply and demand principles will recognise that the presence of so much inner city car parking encourages more people to drive. If there weren't as many parking options in the inner city, more people would travel by public transport instead. So those parking operators are acting as a generator and attractor of high volumes of private vehicle traffic into the inner city. But the rates we're charging those land uses are, again, very, very low. So we need to be charging higher rates to those kinds of land uses which encourage car dependence and generate more traffic, and thus cost us a lot of money in terms of maintaining and upgrading the road network. I could talk at length about a range of other rateable categories and land uses that I think we've got the balance wrong. But my broader point simply is that I think we need to have a proper community conversation and give the people of Brisbane more of a say in how these charges are fixed and determined. Councillor Johnston is a big fan of representative democracy and the idea that we as representatives are elected to make these decisions. And I tend to agree with her critique that we shouldn't just be outsourcing these decisions to unelected public servants. But I think we also should be exploring options to decentralise decision-making to a greater extent and give the people of Brisbane more say in how their rate money is collected and also how it's spent. the Mayor himself acknowledged that reasonable people can disagree about who is most worthy of a rates discount and who at the present time is most in need of financial incentives or a little bit of lenience. Reasonable people can disagree about that, but right now there are 2 million reasonable people in the city who don't get a say. In fact, even I as a councillor don't feel like I have a meaningful say. I feel as though the decisions have already been made behind closed doors before this budget is brought to the chamber for debate. So I think we need to be exploring options such as participatory budgeting and deliberative democracy strategies that allow residents to have more meaningful participation in the rates and charges that we levy on them, in how money is collected, in our debt policy. Maybe there is a case to be taken on more debt, maybe there's not. But the people of Brisbane should have a say in that decision. They don't get a meaningful say simply by voting once every 4 years. That's not enough accountability for us as elected representatives. There needs to be a more robust, structured and democratic approach to decision making about the council budget so that everyone who wants to have a say can have some meaningful input. Other cities around the world are now engaging in surveys and online plebiscites and other forms of deliberative democracy to ask residents what they think. There are literally city councils around the world that say, look, we're in a tight financial position right now. Would you rather we increase rates, or would you rather we take on more debt, or would you rather we cut spending on certain services? And they actually put those decisions to the people in their city. That increases engagement and resident empowerment. And it also makes the political case easier for elected representatives because they're educating the populace about the tough decisions that we have to make as city councillors. So they put those choices to the people of their cities and empower them to be informed about the tough decisions that their councils are making. Those are approaches that we should also be looking at. That doesn't necessarily mean that we have to abdicate responsibility. We can still have the final say if we really want to. But at least let's include the people of Brisbane in these conversations, because I think there would be widely divergent views, even among all the people who voted for the LNP, as to what the best way forward is. It's not the case that everyone who voted for the LNP is going to agree with this particular strategy of discounting rates here, of charging more rates there, of taking on this much debt, etc. Reasonable people can have different views on this stuff.
Councillor Shree, your time has expired. Further speakers? I see no hands. The Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, I wanted to particularly just touch on the issue of debt and borrowings. It's been mentioned a couple of times here. I think that council has a reasonable and responsible level of borrowing. And I think that if you compare it to any reasonable measure, that we do not have high borrowings. If you look at other comparable organisations, you look at other levels of government, you look at corporations, you even look at people's own household finances. Let's just have a quick snapshot here. We have a budget that's a $3.1 billion budget. Our net borrowings at the moment are $2.5 billion. Projected in this budget, they will rise to $2.6 billion. So if you think about it in terms of the budget size, it is not a high level of borrowing. If you think about the type of borrowing that households and families would take on to buy a new home, they would quite regularly take on many times more than their household income to purchase a long-term asset like a house. So, you know, a household borrowing for their main asset, which is their house, would expect to take on many times more than their annual income in borrowings. And that is just given that a lot of people live as a reality and not seen as being unusual. So the level of borrowing that we have in comparison to our budget size is reasonable and responsible. If you take, for example, the level of borrowing that the state government has. So the size of the state budget is about, and I'm speaking from memory here, about $60 billion per annum. And their level of debt last year before COVID was about 90 billion. So the state debt is significantly more than their budget size. Now, some people will speculate and have a view on whether that is too high or not, but the reality is it's a completely different situation to the one that we're in. We have a modest and responsible level of borrowing, and we borrow for infrastructure. We don't borrow to pay operational expenses. We don't borrow to keep on the lights or to pay staff. We borrow to build things, and that will be our approach going forward, and that's the responsible thing to do. I would point out as well that interest rates are low at the moment, and if there's any time to borrow, now would be one of those times. So when you build infrastructure and they're at least partially funded by borrowings, now is a good time to use that kind of strategy as one of the sources of income for the job creating projects. I think I'll just leave my comments at that, Mr. Chair.
Right, I will now put the resolution for items 1, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 14, 15, and the included table. All those in favour say aye and raise your hands.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Please lower your hands. And all those against, please say no and raise your hand. The ayes have it.
Division.
Division called by Councillor Adams and Councillor Hammond. Please ring the bells. Councillors, all those in favour, please say aye. Raise your hand and hold it there so it may be counted.
Aye.
Aye.
Yeah, she's there. Please lower your hands. And those against, please say no and raise your hand and hold it there so it may be counted.
No.
Clerks, please read the result when you're ready.
Mr. Chair, the ayes have it, the voting being 25 in favour and 1 against.
The ayes have it. I will now put item 2. All those in favour say aye and raise your hands.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Please lower your hands. And on item 2, those against, please say no and raise your hands.
No.
No.
The ayes have it. I suspect someone might want to call it division.
Division.
Councillor Johnston and Councillor Landers, please ring the bells. All those in favour, please say aye, raise your hand and hold it there so it may be counted.
Aye.
Aye.
Please lower them. And all those against, please say no. Raise your hand and hold it there so it may be counted.
No.
No.
You only get 1 vote, Councillor Cook. All right. Please lower your hands. Clerks, please read the result when you're ready.
Mr. Chair, the ayes have it, the voting being 19 in favour and 7 against.
The ayes have it. Now on item 4, all those in favour, please say aye and raise your hand and hold it there.
Aye.
Oh, no,
Aye.
oh.
Aye.
Thank you. Those against, please lower your hands. Those against, please say no. Raise your hand and say no. The ayes have it. No division? All right. On item 11 and 12 together, all those in favour say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Please lower your hands. And those against, please say no and raise your hand. The ayes have it. Item 13, all those in favour, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. Please lower your hands. On item 13, those against, please say no and raise your hand.
No.
The ayes have it.
Division.
Division called by Councillor Allen
Division.
and Councillor Johnston. Please ring the bells. On item 13, all those in favour, please raise your hand and hold it within the screen and say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Please lower your hands. Those against, please say no. Raise your hand and hold it there so it may be counted.
Aye.
Please lower your hand. Clerks, please read the result when you're ready.
Mr. Chair, the ayes have it. The voting being 24 in favour and 2 against.
The ayes have it. Councillors, that brings an end to the business of the budget. I just want to take a moment to thank the officers who have looked after us over the last days and weeks, particularly the clerks who are with us. You can't see them, but there are a lot of people who you can't see who are off camera who have done a lot of work to make this happen. The clerks, the IT team, the streaming guys, thanks to all of those people for their patience and support.
Well done.
Thanks, everyone.
I also want to thank all of you, the council. I believe this last period on Zoom has been particularly difficult for many of us, and I just want to thank you all for the manner in which that you've dealt with these hopefully unique circumstances and for the quality of the debate over the recent period. I just want to thank you for your conduct. I really appreciate it. Good night to you all, and declare the meeting closed.
Let's
Thank you,
come
Mr.
back in
Chair.
all long 2 days. Well done.
See you, everyone.